You're welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by the Uachtaráin Tucht and the Uachtaráin. So it's just to, as Jimmy outlined, we launched a report last Wednesday. It's the culmination of a year's work, really, and I'm again delighted to be joined by members of the Minor Review Work Group here this morning as well, and there's a number of them here and who may contribute later on as well. What we have done over the last 12 months is, first of all, study and try and get a detailed picture of exactly the scenario facing talented young players, but also all our 17 and 18-year-old players. We're very mindful of that this was for all members of the association in that age grade, so that we were considering the club player also. Maybe just to start, once we did consider the areas, and we'll look at the recommendations maybe later on. There are 4 key areas in terms of recommendations. But when we did examine the situation, we did centre everything along putting the player first, putting that young player first. And I think the Uachtaráin addressed it in his opening address this morning very, very adequately in terms of our requirements in that area. So we have 2 video clips, very short video clips in relation. The first one, Jimmy's going to bring it up in a second, is Matthew O'Hanlon. And Matthew was asked, Matthew's the captain of the Wexford senior hurling team. He was asked, I suppose, his experience. Five years since Matthew had played it, and he acknowledges in the video that how things have even grown since then. His experience as a minor player. Okay.
Between all the teams, when I was minor, I think I played with 10 teams per year. So that would be the 2 senior colleges teams in my secondary school, hurling and Gaelic football, the 2 inter-county minor teams at Wexford, Gaelic football and hurling. Then it would have been minor, under 21 and adult level with club hurling and football. So in the total in 1 year I would have played with 10 different teams.
And did you feel under pressure to to play with all, to train and play with all of those to an equivalent level, Matthew?
To a certain extent, the commitment first and foremost for inter-county minor level would be probably the most out of all those teams. Secondary school, as I was in my 5th and 6th year, my last couple of years in secondary school, there was a lot of pressure there to participate as one of the older members and a leader in that group. And then at club level, your club is where you're loyal to, and it's where you start out your career, and it's where your friends and family are involved with the most. So there is an element of pressure there to represent your club adequately too. So at that level, you're quite young, and it's difficult to manage the workload, especially when you probably don't have the strength of character to say, oh no, I haven't got time, or I'm too tired, or I'm carrying this injury, or I cannot attend this training session, because you're trying to please everyone and you're eager to impress as well.
And that was a key message. We're trying to please everyone. That was a key message in terms of when we had a focus group here with players who've recently graduated out of the minor age grade, and when in our player questionnaire of over 300 minor players, they did say they don't want to let one team down. Don't want to let their club down. They feel they owe duty to their club. They don't want to let their school down, and they want to make a the county panel. So in terms of the actual workload on these players, I mean the days of the week. So we have 24% who are active 7 days a week, and we'll bring up a slide in a second which shows the level of activity 7 days a week, and a further 27.3% who are 6 days a week. All the way back, often more than once a day, and as I said, we'll look at that in a second. Also, Matthew mentioned their pressure, and we'll see another video clip in a second to just show how vulnerable some of these players are in terms of pressure, the pressure that they feel, and this is just pressure in terms of to participate. When we add on top of that the academic concerns of exams, state exams, be it the A-levels or the Leaving Certificate, you can just imagine the mental pressure that players are placed under. Jura is going to deal with, in particular, in relation to the area of player welfare, there's 62% of players said that they were playing while injured. So they're carrying an injury, but they want to make the county panel. They'll cover it up just to make sure that they don't lose their chance. While 42% said that they had experienced chronic fatigue. In terms of the figures, one we don't have in there, 35% said that they wanted less training sessions. Very few said they wanted less games. They're fine with games. Now, you know, the one thing we have to consider, these are 17 and 18-year-old players. All they want to do is play. Okay, Cathal Craig in the afternoon will be, we have been piloting software, which is basically an app on a phone where players would fill in their activity at the end of a day, the sport activity that they had. So we're going to look at 2 players. The first one is a 17-year-old player and just plays one code, just plays Gaelic football. So in a 9-day period, you'll see 12 sessions. The days where there are 2 activities are highlighted in red. So for example, on Monday the 3rd of March, training with the school at 4 p.m. And later that evening training with the inter-county panel. So there's a lot there to digest, but that is real. That is real information. It's not isolated. You could pick that information from a number of this player's colleagues, and it would be very, very similar. So that's the first week in March for a player just playing one code. We now have someone who's multi-code. So there is on the app, they're able to fill in, there's a drop-down menu, so they have options in terms of to select what level of, or how much energy they have. And so this particular player, an 18-year-old player, plays hurling and football at inter-county level and also plays inter-county soccer. Amazingly, he has actually one less session than the previous player, even though it plays. Now, I'm led to believe that there were, say, 3 sessions missed because they would have been on at the same time. But you get to the end of the week and you just see, and this is the player's own analysis of how they're feeling, and this is just physically. A lot of the players would have told us one of the key concerns is not just training, but going to training and going home from training and being home at maybe 11:30 at night, or going somewhere very early in the morning for a training session. So that's an added burden that I suppose we're not measuring here. That's just the time spent on the field. Okay, in terms of that's, I suppose, the level of activity. We're going to come to the proposal in a second, but GAAL's committee, the Medical and Scientific Welfare Committee, have been doing an awful lot of work in relation to the impact of that.
Well, I think...
I'll let GAAL maybe introduce the next video.
Well, good to Micheal. Good morning, everybody. And as a member of the Minor Review Group and Chairman of the Medical Scientific and Welfare Committee, it's a privilege to be able to address you here at the Coaching and Games Development Conference today. We're going to start the player welfare section of this presentation with another video. This time we have a chartered physiotherapist, John Casey, who previously worked with Munster Rugby and over the last 7 years has been lead physiotherapist with the Tipperary senior hurling team. So we asked John to comment on the vulnerabilities and also the challenges and demands being placed on young players and his assessment of the impact of that. So we'll listen to that for a minute or so now.
Well, I think they're a particularly vulnerable group. In my experience, the players that I've come across, they're very vulnerable on a few levels. First of all, I suppose, psychologically and emotionally, they're not fully developed, and they seem to be under severe pressure because these are the best kids in their age group. They're under peer pressure. They're under pressure from parents sometimes. They're definitely under pressure from managements because these are the guys who tend to be playing under 4, 5, even 6 different managers. Most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, who are not in communication with each other. And each manager is not aware of what the other managers, the pressures or the physical stresses or strains or time constraints that the other managers are putting them under. So they're under pressure from parents, maybe not so much in terms of being pushed into sport, but they're under pressure maybe to performance in school or time at home. And psychologically, I think there are major tolls on these pressures, on these players. The other thing is that the whole physical side of it, these players are not fully developed. We're asking them to train at levels that are sometimes beyond what our senior intercounty players are training at, because the control over a senior intercounty player is far better.
Okay, I suppose one word that would strike you there is the word pressure, and we heard it from Matthew O'Halloran as well. there's a lot of pressure and demands. Some of these not obvious, not clearly evident all of the time, and they're often internalised. And even if we go back to what the Uachtaráin said earlier on today, there are a lot of challenges, particularly with young boys, where they don't express their emotions, they don't express their feelings. And if they have an opportunity to play in an inter-county panel, or to be successful with their school or their club team, they're not going to say no. So in terms of the player welfare background, we're very conscious of the demands, we're very conscious of the silence of it, we're very conscious of the multiple team approach. And I don't think there's any other sport where a 17 or 18-year-old would be expected to play on anything up to 10 teams. And in addition to that, I think one of the key focal points for us has to be to look at the long-term playing career of the player. So if we look at some of the points here, the risk of injury in sport is inherent. Over the last 7 or 8 years, we've had an alliance with UCD in terms of maintaining an injury database from inter-county teams. And we have 7 years data from an average of about 15 to 20 teams each year. And that's telling us that 2 out of 3 players on a team will get injured in one season. Over a third of players will have multiple injuries, and up to a quarter of injuries will be recurrence of an old injury where a player didn't have an opportunity to recover. So these are, actual statistics, they're actual facts, and we can't ignore them. John Casey referred to the lack of communication between different management teams. Managers are under pressure to perform. They're under pressure to deliver results, and they want each player and their panel to have that team as his #1 priority. And often at times, some players will be expected to be in 2 places at once. Micheal referred to it there, where there were common sessions going on where players couldn't be with a second team because they were with another team. So that generates a lot of demand on players. I've mentioned the fact that they're reluctant to say no to managers. And a lot of this leads to inadequate rest and recovery time. And all of you who are involved in coaching and looking after players know the importance and significance of rest and recovery. It's every bit as important as activity. And then the key point for me that I briefly referred to, we don't have sufficient focus on the long-term playing career of our inter-county players. One of the doctors on our Medical, Scientific and Welfare Committee, who's been working with inter-county teams for over 30 years, told me that he's now seeing injuries with 19-year-olds that he previously wouldn't have seen until players were in their late 20s or early 30s. And again, that's something we can't ignore. And what we really want to see with our players, and this association is very much centred on the player, of course, what we want to see and what we need to see is that players fulfil their potential. Yes, playing underage is hugely important, but that's also preparation for fulfilling their potential as players right the way through into their 20s, and that they can play into their 30s and even longer if they want. We don't want to see overuse, overtraining, and ultimately burnout destroying that opportunity. So burnout, of course, the common word that we see talked about a lot lately, sometimes gets sensationalized, so we have to be, again, careful not to do that. But this slide is simply showing that there's a relationship or a continuum between overtraining, burnout and dropout. Terms like overtraining, overuse injuries, burnout are often used interchangeably. They're related but different. Overtraining happens when players, they can develop injuries, when they are training too much, they're not getting enough recovery time. We get overuse injuries then when there are other stress factors in addition to overtraining. And in this instance, a player may have an injury from which they haven't fully recovered. They may have other stressors in relation to school or studying for exams and so on, and we have to factor that in. And if we ignore all of those, we then end up with burnout. And the critical thing about burnout is a player has essentially lost interest in playing. He is psychologically and physically exhausted. He has a resentment of sport. And the primary difference between overtraining and burnout is motivation. An overtrained player will still want to play, but when you hit the burnout stage, you don't want to play. So it's a terrible situation if we actually let a player get to burnout. Now, thankfully, I think there is a lot of good management out there. So burnout is something we have to be aware of, but it's something we shouldn't exaggerate. But burnout is the critical stage before we have dropout. So we have an opportunity in terms of implementing the recommendations of the minor review group and in terms of the skill sets all of you bring to the association to prevent us reaching the burnout and dropout stage. And that's a hugely important skill and opportunity each and every one of us has in terms of looking after our young players. The next 3 slides are related. They're all about prevention. And the old adage that prevention is better than cure certainly applies. So how do we prevent overtraining? I'm sure you'll be familiar with a lot of these points. Limit weekly and yearly participation time. Again, Micheal's slide referred to the fact that we had some guys doing activity 7 days a week, sometimes twice a day. You have to ask the question, does that make sense? And we need to modify training for individuals. Particularly our underage players develop at different rates and at different stages. So we need to factor in age, growth rates, readiness, and injury history. Injury history is very important. Maintaining accurate records of performance. You'll hear more about that from Cathal later in the week. But not alone do we need to maintain records, we need to act on those records. What are those records telling us? Including, and there are a lot of tests now, for boot swings. I was talking to an inter-county manager the other day, and he told me he'd given 2 of his players the month of January off based on their mood. Now, I think that's really good to hear. But that's the level of activity you need. I recall speaking with Brian McAniff a number of years ago, and he told me when he was managing Donegal back in the early 90s, he tried to speak to all of his players every day, which was a great achievement in pre-mobile phone days. But his key thing there was understanding their mood. Was there something going on at home? Had a guy, a young child, and was up during the night. So understanding the pressures and demands on players is very important. Nutrition, hydration, status, and sleep, all critical and often forgotten about. The external stress factors that I've just referred to. And again, allow full recovery after injury and illness. And of course, the key word, communications. We heard a lot about pressure. Again, we heard John Casey referring to communication. Communication is huge. And again, going back to the Uachtaráin's point, that sometimes young boys won't volunteer information. So we need to develop skill sets and means to get these guys to express what is concerning. Preventing overuse. Again, the participation time is critical here. And there have been a number of initiatives over the last number of years that the welfare side and coaching and games have worked on. Best example being the new GA15 warm-up routine and cool down properly before and after training and games. Pre-season conditioning programs are also important. Pre-season injury assessment. You can achieve a lot there by understanding if there are any underlying trends at club and inter-county level. That's very important. When an overuse injury is diagnosed, addressing the underlying cause is very important. And a key part of that is working with the various stakeholders. So for instance, getting parents involved so that whatever their son is doing at home is reflected in terms of the recovery from injury program. And understanding that if you do rest and recover properly, you won't lose your opportunity to be a member of a team or panel. And I suppose we often hear the thing, no pain, no gain. I was talking to John Tobin, the Connacht games manager last night, and he said, no pain, no gain makes no sense. And I couldn't agree with him more. It's hugely important. And then just a little point at the end that training load should not be increased by more than 10% per week. And I heard of a team recently that was training 28 days out of 31 in January. Now, I'm no expert in coaching, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Then, preventing the one thing we really want to avoid, burnout. Again, overscheduling and excessive time commitment to sport. We all love sport, we all love the GA, but there is more to life than that. And particularly when you're 16, 17, 18, there are a lot of other things going on. We have to reflect that. And we've seen it, I think coaching and games development have done tremendous work over the last number of years on the second point, skill development over competition and winning at a young age, and creating too much anxiety, creating too much stress. The fundamental life skills, communication, stress management and decision making. And again, the Health and Wellbeing Committee here in Croke Park, and those committees have been established around the association and around the country. They have an important role to play here as well. The principles of training, obviously, you're all skilled in coaching and that. We have to apply the fundamental principles all of the time. Communications and treating each player as an individual. One size does not fit all. And I know the Uachtaráin Tuffa has a number of Fs that he told us about when he was elected last year. You know, and fun is an important F as well. We all want to enjoy our involvement with the association. It's very important. So that's just some thoughts and ideas on how we need to promote awareness of the whole area of overtraining, overuse injuries and burnout, and some of the prevention strategies, all of which are relatively easy to do. So this is not a crisis that we can't address. This is something we should be doing as part of our normal day-to-day activity. in coaching and developing our players. I'm going to hand you back to Micheal at this stage now to start reviewing the recommendations of the minor review group.
Margaret, Ger. So, I suppose with all that information and armed with the information, our findings and with the player welfare background, our areas of consideration, and there are reports here for people to take away with them also. When our group sat down, we, as I said already, we put the player first, but also what we wanted to do is come up with reasonable proposals that would make a difference. We consulted widely. We asked counties to make submissions in advance. We produced an interim report 6 months into the study with some recommendations and asked counties for feedback. We had discussions with post-primary schools and with a number of different bodies to seek feedback and to try and reach a consensus on addressing the issues that have been outlined. So in terms of proposals, the first area in terms of age eligibility, and again the key proposal, I think the Uachtaráin addressed it this morning already, the player must be over 17 to play in adult competitions, moving the age of eligibility up 1 year, and we think that would make a significant difference to players. Also in terms of, I heard a quote during the week that it's now a young man's game. You see some of our players in their late 20s now who are retiring from the inter-county game. And there has been, albeit still a very small trend, but there is a trend now of players who are still minors participating with their adult inter-county team, and particularly with their under-21 team. We've already outlined the pressures that these players face, and we're making again a strong recommendation that those players should not be eligible to play on those teams at inter-county level. Then in terms of a minor inter-county player, that player, until he's finished his minor inter-county minor activity, which for most will be sometime in the month of May, and until that time that they wouldn't play in adult league or challenge games. That doesn't affect championship, but does affect adult league or challenge games. In terms of age grades, and there's been, I suppose, much discussion in and around age grades and the maybe changing age from under 18 to under 17, or the under 21 grade, which we looked at as well. But we focused within our remit of under 18. We feel, and from talking to counties, that the appetite is not there at the moment for moving away from under 18. Some of the concerns expressed were that if we move down to under 17, will the level of dropout of club players increase after 17? What we are proposing, and we've had a high level of interest from counties in terms of this pilot, is to one county per province would participate in a 3-year pilot to shift their age grades to 13, 15, 17 and 19. And a detailed research project will be conducted. And if proposals are to be made, then they'll be made with concrete evidence, which I think need to support any proposal in that regard. The second area is an attempt to create competition, definite competition windows. At the moment, and there are only so many weeks in the year, so there will be a level of overlap. But at the moment, February, March, April, particularly in terms of club, school and colleges, is an area of concern. September is another area because club and the school competitions are recommencing. So some proposals, and we haven't taken all the proposals here, but we're highlighting the main proposals. The first call for post-primary schools and players who are at the latter stages of their competition. So in that February, in mid-February, the post-primary provincial finals will be played. That the post-primary school should have first call on those players. They should be allowed to finish their post-primary schools competitions before being burdened with the level of inter-county activity that will be required. In relation to that then, we're also trying to create a definite window for senior post-primary competitions that they will come forward by a fortnight to the end of March to create that definite window. And again, for club minor competitions, that the club minor competitions will be finished by mid-October, and the post-primary school competitions wouldn't start until that date. So that there's definite, defined windows. Notwithstanding that, there will be some overlap, but certainly less of an overlap than is there at the moment. We're hoping, and there will be proposals that Ger is going to look at in a second in relation to championship format. We're making proposals in relation to minor leagues, inter-county minor leagues. At the moment, some of those minor leagues start very early in February, and they're provincially based. We're making recommendations that there will be more cross-county, to be regionally based. Counties will be closer together. Hopefully there will be an element that they can be played midweek to free up weekends for club activity. And also that they would start later, that there would be a bigger lead-in period for training, that they would start later in February, and that there would be a definite window for inter-county championship also. So trials can be organised at weekends, and I know there's a work group at the moment, and Duke Drum mentioned earlier the calendar year and proposals around fixtures. I know there's proposals also coming in relation to what has been referred to as the training ban and the regulations in and around when inter-county teams can train. The proposal has been the 1st of February. There's now flexibility for counties to organise weekend activity in January, notwithstanding the fact that post-primary schools, remember, have first call on their players when they're in their serious competitions. I've mentioned the regional leagues already, and we're also, we will be requesting Central Council place a limit on the number of minor inter-county challenge games. Again, we've studied the details. Some counties have a reasonable number of inter-county games, while others have what we would consider an excessive number of challenge games, and often in and around leaving cert time. Bank holiday weekend in June last year, we saw a number of inter-county panels playing challenge games, despite the fact that players were starting exams the following week. And then in terms of provincial minor Gaelic football championships, that again, that window, that they will no earlier than the second weekend in April and no later than the first weekend in May. We're also proposing, and this will allow provincial councils flexibility in relation to fixtures of minor, should they decide to go on a standalone basis, that all our minor football quarterfinals be discontinued from 2016, and that there will be, on a pilot basis, in terms of monitoring the proposals and in relation to scheduling, that a national underage CCC would monitor and implement the cross-provincial inter-county fixtures up to and including minor. So they're the first two areas. I'm going to hand back to Ger to look at the second two areas of our proposals.
Thanks, Micheal. In terms then of formative competitions in inter-county, Micheal referred already to the regional leagues to replace the current provincial leagues to give a greater balance there and a more even number of games. And he also referred to limiting the number of inter-county minor challenge games. And again, that takes up a lot of time for players. You know, a busload of players goes away early in the morning on a Saturday. Sometimes they're going midweek. Again, you know, the whole level of rest and tiredness. And travel in itself is not necessarily a restful exercise, even if you're sitting on a bus and you're worried about having to go home and get study done and so on. So they're important things. One of the things that we have at present, obviously, is that each provincial minor championship is run on a different basis, essentially. Some provinces give 2 chances, others don't. And, you know, we've had scenarios where counties can lose up to 3 games and potentially still win an All-Ireland minor championship. So we feel there is a need to sit down and discuss that with the provincial councils and move towards a more uniform approach there. And we believe every county in the minor championship should be offered an opportunity to play 2 games. So hopefully we'll see some progress on those. In addition to that, in terms of looking at the under-17 age and the opportunities there for less successful counties, we would want to promote an under-17 All-Ireland competition with the finals played in Croke Park, and that would commence in May following the first rounds of the minor championship. And at hurling, similar type competition, the minor hurling B and C be reorganised and promoted as under-17 competitions, again with the finals in Croke Park, and that would require a rule change in order to achieve that. Then on to the player welfare and coach education area. And I suppose we'd like to think all the proposals go across the areas of welfare and coach education, but we have a number of specific points in this area. One of the initiatives that we've developed this year, and which has been approved by Central Council, is to appoint a player welfare mentor in each county. And we have a pilot underway on that in 2015. The purpose of the player welfare mentor would be to have an independent person, independent of teams and independent of team managements, who would be a go-to person for underage players if they're tired, if they're stressed, if they're worried about anything, and they don't want to raise the issue with the manager. So essentially would be a representative of the players. It's certainly a challenging role, Ulster have already done quite a lot of good work in this area, and they're piloting it in all 9 counties this coming year. And we hope to have 1 county in each of the other 3 provinces. We're going to provide central support from the Player Welfare Department here in Croke Park. We're going to train people, support them, we're going to get feedback. And we're interested in getting feedback from counties as they trial it as to what's the best way to approach this. Is 1 player welfare mentor sufficient? Is the role sufficiently well defined? But the whole emphasis in this is putting the player at the centre and giving the player the opportunity, or his parents perhaps, to raise concerns and issues and make sure those issues are dealt with in a manner that protects the player's long-term playing interests and also doesn't damage his opportunity of playing on his inter-county minor team, for example. We want to continue to develop the player welfare-based education materials and programs for players, coaches and parents of players. One of the benefits of technology nowadays is that we can get directly to players with the various platforms we have. We have an e-learning platform developed here by Coaching and Games Development, and there are a lot of courses on that any of us can do. And we've also been working on communications and everything from nutrition to concussion management and various other aspects of training and playing, which are important. And again, we're not relying on a chain of command or a hierarchy to distribute this information. It's available to everybody through the learning section and through the player welfare sections on the GAA.ie website. We want to extend the player welfare charter to be agreed inside by team managers down to underage inter-county teams. And some people might say, so what? But I think if you get people to sit down, discuss something and make a commitment, there is a better chance of succeeding in achieving aims. We also want to produce some more specific guidelines on activity levels for talent academy and minor team players. Now, of course, part of the theme of our presentation has been that you have to look at the player as an individual, so guidelines only go so far. But I think, and again, if you look at the literature in this area, it's difficult to find literature that says you should only train X number of times per week. But I think we're going to have to provide guidelines there in order that there's a more common sense approach and a reference point for coaches and players. And finally, we have a lot of expertise around the association and in other associations as well. And I think we can avail of the expertise that is out there to help us develop these themes. So we see this as a starting point and a continuation of work already done. It's not an end point, it's something we want to keep a strong focus on. So there are, that's the end of our presentation. I suppose before I throw it open to the floor, we'd like to think that we've come up with a reasonable set of presentations or a reasonable set of recommendations. Ultimately, it's you who will decide that, and through your counties, our proposals go to Congress. So if you do think these things are reasonable, if you do think they make sense, if you do think they're putting the player at the centre of our activity and giving our young players the opportunity of a long-term, enjoyable playing career in the GAA, I would ask you to go back to your counties and encourage support for them. Now we'll throw it open to the floor for any comments or questions for the next 5 or 10 minutes.